My heart, I could feel forceful thrusts against my ribcage as it pulsed. 70, 80, 90 beats per minute, my tremulous hand betrayed my every effort to remain composed. As I slowly raised it, it wavered just above my ear. This was me, 2 years ago, trying to ask a question in class. Growing up, I considered myself to be rather shy and introverted. But because I attended a class of about the same 15 to 20 people throughout elementary school, my shyness didn't inhibit my ability to engage in my learning environment. But then, the summer before my freshman year, my family made the momentous decision to move back here to the United States from our home overseas in China. The culture shock was overwhelming, to say the least. My standard class size doubled to 30 to 40 people, and my school size increased tenfold. During passing period, I was one amidst 3,000 other students and teachers, the vast majority of whom I would never even meet. This all entrenched a sensation of isolation and loneliness that prevented me from actively participating in class. As a result, I came to the realization over my last few years of public school education that I was not the only one afflicted by fear of asking questions. It is a crisis in our education system. In his book, The Pedagogy of the Oppressed, by Paulo Freire, a Brazilian educator, he wrote about the constrictive paradigms of education, three of which being that the teacher teaches and the students are taught. The teacher knows everything and the students know nothing. The teacher thinks and the students are thought about. But when we acquiesce to this type of education system, students merely become receptacles to be filled up to the brim by teachers, and we as students don't actively participate in our own learning process. A glaring example of this is the rote memorization that pervades almost every subject. Rather than understanding and deriving concepts, we commit them to memorization for the ease of regurgitation during a test. The problem lies in that our education system implicitly condones this approach to learning by emphasizing the memorization of answers rather than the asking of questions. And therefore, when one has a question, it can feel a lot like, no one else even needs to know the answer to my question, or I'm just going to be slowing down the class, or my question doesn't even make sense to anyone else. And yes, I understand. I've been there. Asking questions is vulnerable. It's a public declaration that my knowledge is deficient and that I do not know everything. But it is also a public declaration that I am seeking understanding in that area in which I am insufficient in. Therefore, asking questions is essential. All thinking is driven by the asking of questions. And these questions aren't just the who, what, when, where questions, but the why. Questions that elicit genuine contemplation, to have minds interlaced, ever pregnant with ideas. These questions lead to a chain reaction of inquiry that either results in more interest or disinterest, both of which are inevitable and necessary, as they both contribute to the learning process, one of growth and transformation. I myself have experienced this type of metamorphosis since my freshman year, and my standing on the stage today is evidence of how far I've come in terms of my ability to express myself and understand myself. First and foremost, it began by realizing that I had to be assertive about my own education. In school, there are certain circumstances that are not in our direct control and parts of our education that we cannot directly influence. And in fact, that means that what is key is our response to the imposed circumstances. We come to school for 5 days a week, 7 hours a day, in classrooms, in passing period, and school is essentially what makes up the most of our lives, from kindergarten through senior year, or maybe even college. And therefore, it is key to develop a way to respond to the circumstances that are presented and the opportunities that are available. The way that I decided to respond was by asking questions. I began to ask questions about everything that I did not yet know about. Asking questions for me became a way to understand myself better. And in fact, I had to come and overcome a lot of personal barriers to be able to ask those questions. However, there are measures that we can impose within the classroom to be able to create an environment that is more conducive to question asking. The first is to instill within students intellectual humility. We have gaps within our knowledge and we have voids in our intellect that are not filled. Going back to Freire's paradigms of education, or constrictive paradigms of education, we realize that teachers do not know everything, but much so, neither do students know everything. And we have to be cognizant of where we are deficient, and in those areas, be willing to ask questions. The second is that through asking questions, we can actually realize our areas of interest and disinterest and differentiate between them. When we don't ask questions, we retain our preconceived notions about a subject. But when we ask questions and we put those preconceived notions aside and are really willing to delve deeply into a subject that might be unknown to us or that we might already have a distaste for, we have an open-minded approach to it and can actually find ourselves interested in subjects that we never thought we could be interested in before. But all this talk about questions has been limited to the academic sphere. But really, the asking of questions is about better understanding yourself, others, and the world around us. I visited Claremont McKenna College a few months ago, and I learned that their motto is not learning for the sake of learning, but learning for the sake of doing. Asking questions is not an end to itself. Asking questions is a means to an end, a means to better understand ourselves, each other, and the world around us. Freire also wrote that knowledge only emerges through invention and reinvention, through the hopeful, continuing inquiry of human beings with the world, in the world, and with each other. Therefore, we see that when we ask questions, we're actually reaching for something much greater than just an answer. We're reaching for a better understanding of who we are as intellectuals, but also as human beings. I'm sure many of us have probably heard the proverb, give a man a fish and he'll eat for a day. Teach a man to fish and he'll eat for a lifetime. In the same way, we have to instill within students the ability to ask questions. These asking of questions will be able to open up and expand our minds to be able to fill those voids and bridge those gaps. So the next time you have a question, I urge you to raise your hand a little bit higher. Thank you.